The air in the hearing room was so still I could hear the frantic beat of my own heart. My father, General Jensen, a man who believed legacy was forged in brass and thunder, pointed a finger that trembled with rage. "Traitor," he yelled, the word echoing off the soundproofed walls as if it were a physical blow. "I demand you face a court-martial." I stood my ground, my expression a mask of calm I had spent a lifetime perfecting. Then, Admiral Thorne, a man whose tired eyes had seen the true cost of secrets, rose slowly from his seat. His gaze was fixed not on my face, but on the symbol freshly exposed on my back. His voice was a quiet thunder that cracked the tension. "General, you need to stand down." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on the room, like dust on a tomb. "In her operational capacity, she's above your rank." My father's face, moments before flushed with righteous fury, turned a ghostly, horrifying white. The accusation died on his lips, replaced by the dawning, shattering realization that the world he knew, a world of clear hierarchies and visible power, had just been turned inside out. He didn't see his daughter anymore. He saw a power he couldn't comprehend, an authority he had just publicly tried to break. I watched the titan of my childhood crumble, and felt only a cold, hollow calm. It all started 2 weeks earlier, at his retirement gala. The ballroom glittered with medals and false smiles, a perfect monument to his 40-year career. I stood near the wall in my dress uniform, feeling more like a piece of furniture than a guest, a footnote in his grand story. On stage, he raised a glass to my brother, Major Leo Jensen, the family's golden eagle who flew F-35 seconds and wore his charisma like a second skin. "To a legacy of honor." My father boomed to thunderous applause. Then his eyes found me. "And to my daughter Eva, who pushes papers at Fort Meade. We're proud of you too, sweetie." The polite laughter felt like 1,000 tiny needles, each one a reminder of the science fairs he'd missed, the academic awards he'd forgotten, my entire life's work reduced to a condescending pat on the head. Later that evening, a foreign attaché approached me to offer polite congratulations. I knew him, of course, not as a diplomat, but as a critical target in an ongoing counterintelligence operation my team was running. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was a delicate, dangerous dance, a moment that could make or break months of work. But before I could even speak, my father was there. He physically grabbed my arm, pulling me away with a force that bruised. "My daughter has nothing to say to your kind," he snarled, his voice a low growl meant only for the attaché and me. In that single brutish moment, he didn't just embarrass me, he risked everything. He thought he was protecting his precious legacy. He had no idea he'd just publicly manhandled a covert asset in front of a hostile intelligence officer, effectively blowing my cover. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the 2 lives he forced me to live. To truly understand the 2 lives I was living, you have to go back to last Christmas. The scene was perfect, almost painfully so. A roaring fire, the scent of pine and cinnamon in the air, the soft glow of lights on the tree. It was a picture of family warmth, a picture I always stood on the outside of. My brother, Leo, was holding court, his laughter echoing through the room. My father was practically glowing with pride, his hand clamped on Leo's shoulder as if my brother were a trophy he'd just won. I sat on the armchair by the window, nursing a cup of tea, feeling the familiar chill of being present but not quite part of the celebration. Then came the main event. Leo's presentation. He'd hooked his laptop up to the television, and suddenly the room was filled with the thunderous roar of jet engines. We were watching stunning, high-definition footage from his F-35, a sleek predator of a machine tearing through a desert canyon. "Tip of the spear," my father boomed, his voice thick with emotion. "That's my boy right there. A true warrior, carrying on the Jensen legacy." My mother looked on, her eyes shining with tears of pride. They saw power. They saw glory. They saw a hero. They saw everything they wanted to see. When the video finished and the applause died down, I made a quiet attempt to connect. I'd just returned from a 3-month deployment to North Africa, a mission I couldn't speak about, a mission that ended with me being awarded the Joint Service Commendation Medal. I cleared my throat. "I received a commendation, actually," I said, my voice sounding small in the suddenly quiet room. I held out the case. It wasn't a flashy video, just a piece of bronze and ribbon. To me, it represented sleepless nights, impossible choices, and 2 teammates who only made it home because of a call I made. It was the heaviest thing I had ever held. My father took the case, glanced at the medal for a half second, and then gave me a gentle, dismissive pat on the head. "That's nice, Eva. For logistics, was it? Good for you." He handed it back and turned to my brother to ask about targeting pods. In that moment, the nickname was born, a little family joke that felt like a brand. "The General's Scribe," he'd say with a chuckle. And the internal ledger in my mind clicked over once again. This dismissal wasn't new. It was just another entry on a long list, right next to him forgetting my graduation from advanced intelligence training and calling my master's degree a nice little hobby. Later that night, my mother, Martha Jensen, a woman who treated family peace like a fragile glass bird that must be protected at all costs, cornered me in the kitchen. She took my hands in hers, her expression pleading. "You need to understand your father, dear," she whispered. "His entire identity is tied to the uniform, to the fight. Your brother's career is something he can see, can touch. It's straightforward, just be patient with him." Her words weren't meant to wound, but they did. They were a quiet confirmation that my world was too complex for them to bother understanding, and that the burden of keeping the peace would always fall on me. That cozy, suffocating living room was one world. My other world couldn't have been more different. It was a place of absolute silence and cold, recycled air. A place you entered through a series of biometric scanners that read your irises and your veins. It was a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, buried deep within Fort Meade. There were no windows. There were no family photos. It was a sterile world of immense, hidden power. And in that world, I wasn't the quiet, overlooked daughter. I wasn't the General's Scribe. There, I was Nightingale. I was the operational director for Project Chimera, a clandestine unit within the Aegis Directorate tasked with hunting rogue agents and neutralizing insider threats. I didn't push papers. I wrote the protocols that spies lived and died by. Just a week after that Christmas, I stood before a council of grim-faced intelligence chiefs, men and women who reported directly to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I was the one giving the briefing. "The asset is now in deep cover," I stated, my voice steady and sure. "We've sanitized his digital footprint and activated the Ghost protocol. His bona fides are solid. We anticipate contact with the target within 48 hours. The people in that room didn't pat me on the head. They listened. They asked sharp, insightful questions about exfiltration windows and contingency plans. Questions I answered with absolute certainty, because I had planned for every one of them. The lives of an entire network of agents depended on my analysis, on my decisions. The quiet, intense respect in that room was the only validation I ever knew, and it came from peers who understood that the most important battles are the ones the world never hears about. The irony was a constant, bitter weight in my chest. My family saw me as the safe, boring one, while my desk job was the very thing that allowed them to sleep safely at night. For years, I had accepted the two worlds. I let them think I was the scribe, because it kept them safe. But when my father put my mission, my team, and national security at risk for the sake of his ego, he broke the firewall. I decided it was time to speak to him in the only language he truly respected: protocol and authority. That night, after the gala, I didn't go home. The sting of humiliation, the familiar ache of being misunderstood, I walled it all off. Emotion was a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I drove to a stark, nondescript building and entered a world my family couldn't even imagine. The objective was already forming in my mind, cold and clear as ice. This was no longer about a family drama or a father's wounded pride. This was a security breach. The goal wasn't revenge, not in the emotional sense. The goal was containment. The goal was a formal, procedural correction of record. In the sterile silence of my office, a room shielded from all outside surveillance, I accessed the secure network. My fingers moved deliberately across the keyboard, my actions guided by years of training. I initiated a formal report under Protocol 17, blue-on-blue compromise. It's a mechanism reserved for the rarest of circumstances, when a friendly asset is compromised by a friendly, but unauthorized source. This wasn't me complaining about my father. This was Nightingale, the director of Project Chimera, reporting a critical threat to an ongoing national security operation. I didn't write about my feelings. I wrote about facts. I detailed the time and location of the incident. I cited the specific articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice my father had violated by physically accosting a fellow officer. I documented the potential exposure of my identity to a known agent of a hostile power, referencing the specific national security statutes that were now in jeopardy. Each sentence was a brick, and with them I built a wall of irrefutable procedural fact. There was no emotion, no hint of a personal grudge, only the cold, hard logic of the system he revered. The final section of the report required recommendations. As the compromised asset's operational director, I had the authority to suggest the next steps. I typed that a formal, closed-door inquiry was necessary to assess the operational damage. Then, I moved to the list of required attendees. My fingers paused for a fraction of a second before typing the names. First, General Robert Jensen, cited as the source of the compromise. And second, Admiral James Thorne, the key member of the Aegis Directorate's Oversight Committee. My father would see a familiar face, but I knew the Admiral was one of the few people in the world who would understand the true gravity of the symbol tattooed on my back. The summons were delivered the next morning by stern-faced Marine couriers in a government vehicle. My father saw the official seal from the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and, as I later learned, he smiled. He thought his complaint had been heard, that his traitor daughter was finally being called to account. He had no idea he wasn't walking into his tribunal. He was walking into mine. The hearing room was in the deepest, most secure part of the Pentagon. There were no windows, no decorations, just a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, and walls that seemed to absorb all sound. It was a place designed for quiet, monumental decisions, and the air itself felt heavy with secrets. I was already there, standing at ease, when my father arrived. He walked in with the unmistakable swagger of a 4-star general who believes he is the most important man in any room, self-righteous, confident, and carrying a leather-bound file of his evidence against me. He gave me a look of profound disappointment, as if I were a stain he was about to surgically remove. The inquiry was led by a senior civilian lawyer from the Department of Defense, a man with a dispassionate face and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't begin with me. He turned his calm attention to my father. "General Jensen," he began, his voice flat. "Please, for the record, recount the events of your retirement gala 2 weeks ago." My father sat straighter in his chair, his voice booming as he painted a picture of himself as a vigilant patriot, a concerned father forced to act when he saw his daughter consorting with a known hostile agent. He delivered his story with practiced gravitas, a man utterly convinced of his own heroism. When he finished, the lawyer paused, letting the silence stretch. "And you were certain this was the appropriate course of action, General? To physically accost a commissioned officer in a public setting?" My father bristled, his face reddening. "It was my duty," he shot back. "My duty to my country, and to the uniform I wore for 40 years. It was a matter of honor, something your generation may not fully comprehend." He was lecturing them now, blinded by his own arrogance, completely unaware that the questions were not an attack, but a shovel, which he was using to dig his own grave one self-important word at a time. The lawyer nodded slowly, then turned a page in his file. "And are you aware, General, of the operational status of a clandestine program known as Project Chimera?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, and for the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed my father's face. He recovered quickly, scoffing with a wave of his hand. "I've heard the name. Some backroom intelligence analysis unit, utterly irrelevant to the matter of my daughter's treasonous behavior." He said the word, irrelevant, with such finality, sealing his own fate without a clue as to what he had just done. The lawyer finally turned his gaze to me. "Commander Rostova," he said, his voice still level, "for the record, please state your role and authority in this matter." But before I could utter a single syllable, my father exploded. The thin veneer of his control shattered completely. "Her role? Her role is that of a traitor. he roared, lunging up from his chair. He was on me in 2 strides, his face a mask of fury. He grabbed the shoulder of my formal uniform jacket and ripped it downwards with all his strength. There was a sharp tearing sound and a collective gasp from everyone in the room, and then there was silence. A deep, profound silence as everyone stared at what he had revealed. There on the sleeve of my shirt and tattooed onto the skin of my back and shoulder was the intricate symbol of a chimera, a lion, a goat, and a serpent, coiled around a silent, unringing bell. It was a mark of absolute secrecy, an emblem of power that existed only in the darkest shadows of the intelligence world. The room held its breath, the tension so thick it felt like I could barely breathe. Admiral Thorne, who had been sitting like a stone statue, was the first to react. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "God help us all," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He pointed a trembling finger not at me, but at the symbol. He knew exactly what it was. He turned to me, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at a commander or even his friend's daughter. He was looking at something else entirely. "Commander Rostova," he said, his voice filled with a new, profound respect. "What is your designation?" The room was so quiet I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I met his gaze, my voice clear and steady. "Nightingale, Operational Director, Aegis Directorate." The Admiral closed his eyes for a brief second, then took a deep breath before turning to face my stunned father. "General," he began, his voice now laced with cold, hard authority. "The Aegis Directorate reports directly to the Joint Chiefs and a select Congressional Oversight Committee. Its operational director has executive authority that supersedes, well, nearly everyone in this room." He let that sink in. "You didn't just assault an officer, you laid your hands on Nightingale. You compromised a national security asset at the highest possible level. She is not just a commander. In her operational capacity, she is above your rank." The color drained from my father's face. His entire world, built on a foundation of rank, honor, and visible power, had just been demolished by a symbol he'd never seen and a title he'd never heard. The swagger, the fury, the righteous certainty, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollow, trembling old man who finally understood the catastrophic gravity of what he had done. He wasn't the accuser here. He was the criminal. He stared at me, his eyes wide with terror, finally seeing the daughter who had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. My father spent 40 years collecting the stars on his shoulders. He just learned that the only authority that mattered in this room was a symbol he never even knew existed. The inquiry ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, administrative click of a pen. The DoD lawyer formally concluded the proceedings, his face as impassive as it had been at the start. 2 silent, stone-faced security officers approached my father's chair. They didn't put hands on him, they didn't have to. They simply stood beside him, their presence an undeniable statement. He rose like a man in a dream, his face a blank mask of shock. The 4-star general now just a broken man being led away for a debriefing that I knew would be the agonizing coda to his celebrated career. He didn't look at me as he left. He couldn't. As the door hissed shut behind them, the heavy silence in the room was broken by Admiral Thorne's footsteps. He walked towards me, and the exhaustion on his face was now mixed with a deep, profound respect. He stopped a few feet away, no longer seeing a subordinate or the daughter of a friend. He was seeing the director. "Director," he said, the title feeling both strange and perfectly natural. "The damage assessment on Project Chimera is already underway. Your team's cover is being reinforced as we speak. Whatever you need, whatever resources or support, you have it. Unconditionally." It was the validation I had spent a lifetime craving, delivered not with hollow praise but with the quiet, absolute currency of his world, unwavering professional support. 6 months later, the memory of that hearing room felt like a scene from another person's life. The intervening time hadn't been spent dwelling on the past or savoring a victory. It had been spent working. The breach my father had caused had sent ripples through my network, and my days and nights were consumed with the meticulous, high-stakes work of ensuring my people, my assets, remained safe. The family drama, which had once been the suffocating center of my universe, had faded. It was now just distant noise, a trivial distraction from the real-world consequences I dealt with every single day. My focus had been reclaimed by my purpose. I found myself standing on the command bridge of the USS Ronald Reagan, an aircraft carrier cutting through the deep blue of the Mediterranean Sea. The air hummed with the quiet energy of a warship on high alert. I was there to deliver a live intelligence briefing to the Carrier Strike Group commander, a grizzled captain with a chest full of ribbons. As I spoke, outlining a developing threat in the region, I was aware of the atmosphere around me. The sailors on the bridge, the flight deck officers, the captain himself, they all treated me with a deference and focused attention that had nothing to do with my family name. It was a respect earned by my knowledge, my authority, my call sign. After the briefing, I walked out onto the observation deck, the sea wind whipping at my hair. 2 figures were waiting for me there. Members of my core team from Project Chimera who had flown in to coordinate the next phase of the operation. There were no emotional greetings, no hugs. There was just a shared look of intense loyalty and a quiet nod from my second-in-command. "Welcome back, Nightingale," he said, his voice low. That was it. That was all that was needed. This was my family, a bond forged not in blood, but in shared danger and the silent, mutual understanding of the weight we all carried. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a strange intrusion from another world. I pulled it out to see a text message on the screen. It was from my brother, Leo. I read the words, the salty air stinging my eyes. "Dad's not doing well. He didn't know." I stared at the message for a long time, the little gray bubble stark against the vastness of the ocean. A year ago, those words would have sent a spear of guilt and pity through my heart. I would have felt the familiar, crushing obligation to fix it, to soothe his pain, to make myself smaller so he could feel big again. But now, I felt nothing. Not anger, not even satisfaction. Just a quiet, final detachment. The internal ledger I had kept for so long, the one filled with every slight and every dismissal, was finally balanced. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could reply. I could offer empty platitudes or open a door I had just sealed shut. But I realized my peace was no longer contingent on their understanding or their apology. It was mine, earned in silence and forged in fire they would never see. I didn't delete the message. I simply opened my contacts, found his name, and hit archive. The conversation disappeared, filed away like a closed case. I put the phone back in my pocket and turned my gaze back to the horizon, where the sea met the sky. My mind was already on the next mission. My father believed a legacy was forged in the fire of public battle. I learned that the strongest legacies are built in the silence, guarding the walls no one else can see. A legacy isn't inherited, it's earned in rooms no one knows exist. If you've ever had to operate in a world where your true value was kept under wraps, share your story below. In this community, we recognize the quiet professionals,